What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eastern Current. Got Cameron on here again today. A little nap time recording for me. Cameron's working from home. Don't tell his boss he's taking a break to record a podcast. But we're going to talk sheepshead fishing. It's a great time of year to start catching them inshore. You can definitely still catch them offshore. And so we're going to go over some of the ways that we like to target sheepshead, where we like to target sheepshead, and some effective ways to fish for them. We've talked about them in the past, but as I always share, bringing in new people, talking, me and Cameron haven't talked sheepshead fishing together on here. So you can learn something, from everyone. Everyone's got a little different take or a little different style of how they fish for different fish. So hopefully this will be effective for y'all. Me and Cameron both spoke at a fishing club last night. And we were riding home, and we were surprised at the amount of people that came up and said that they hadn't sheepshead fish, because it's just such a easy access fish. Cameron was talking about how it's such an easy fish to go target on a crappy day when you really can't do anything else. So it's definitely something that's nice to know how to do, something good to have in your back pocket for those snotty days. So I'll go ahead and bring Cameron on here. What's up, dude?
Not much.
It's a pretty little backdrop out there. All your leaves look like they're different colors, like it's fall, but I'm sure it's just the computer camera.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're dying from this no rain.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see all the leaves come back after the winter.
It is. It's a beautiful thing, Cameron.
It's a beautiful thing. Spring.
Well, I'm going to let you start it off. Let's talk about kind of what you look for in near or inshore sheepshead fishing. I'm gonna run.
Yeah.
I just mowed the lawn. I got a bunch of stuff in my throat, and I didn't realize it until I started talking. So I'm gonna run and grab a drink real quick, and I'm gonna let you start talking about inshore fishing sheepshead spots. What's productive?
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, like Judson said, sheepshead is one of those species that's fun to target when it's super windy or when it's really cloudy, and it's just kind of cruddy weather, because you don't really generally need to go too far, in my opinion, or at least from where I usually put in. And you can make a day out of just not going far from the ramp and catching sheepshead. But as far as what to look for, I'd say obviously structure, and generally structure that has a lot of growth on it, because sheepshead will mainly, like if you've ever caught one or looked at one at the fish market or what have you, they have those really big, like almost human teeth.
Oh yeah.
That they use for eating barnacles, sea urchins, crabs, what have you, and all that stuff tends to hang out on pilings or bridge pilings or hard bottom and reefs and wrecks and whatever. So anything that looks like it's got a decent amount of growth on it, I would say is generally good spots to target. I don't know, Judd, maybe you know better than I do, but as far as like current is concerned, I'm not sure how, like, if current plays a big factor in being a productive spot or not, because they're not really feeding on like bait fish getting pushed by, right?
Right.
They're more so just focused on what's on the piling.
Yeah, I think it can be. I've been surprised at how heavy of current areas I have caught sheepshead, but you're usually catching them like in the eddy or out of the current. Mm-hmm. And maybe I don't know if I've ever hooked fish in super heavy. I mean, I've definitely hooked sheepshead in good current, but like I said, I think there's always some good cover there.
I think that's a good point too. And you'll probably have to correct my use of words on this, but when I like find a piling or a bridge that I want to fish, I'll fish on the far side of the current, right? So like if the current is coming from north to south, I'll fish on the south end of that piling, where the eddy forms, just because typically those sheepshead will kind of hang out in that non-current water. And I'll get right up on the piling and drop it straight down. I feel like when I first started sheepshead fishing, I thought it was like, oh, you just pull up like somewhat close to structure and you cast over to it.
Right.
When really it's like you have to be right next to it and essentially just vertically hanging your bait or whatever you're using straight down on that piling.
Yeah.
And then trying different depths, I think is important, like sitting it on the bottom for, maybe a minute, reeling it up 5 feet or 4 feet, depending on how deep of water you're fishing, trying that, and then maybe one other water depth. And then if nothing, I'll just move on to the next piling, because sometimes like one piling will be completely dead, and then like 3 pilings over will be loaded.
That's so true. It's crazy how they can get like that, where they're on one specific piling. But I've seen that happen for sure as well. And fishing like, bottom or whatnot, or structure, you'll find them on one corner of like a structure on the bottom, or one corner of like piece of a live bottom. Those fish move around,
Yeah.
but I think they're definitely, they're just how a redfish is like drawn to a specific part in a creek or whatnot. I think you can kind of see that with the sheepshead on that structure too. There's like productive areas for them to be scavenging.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would say is, as far as like equipment you want to bring for fishing that type of stuff, depending on like if you're fishing a bridge or pilings, you probably don't have to worry about it too much if you're just fishing like docks and whatnot. But if you're fishing a bridge, definitely would recommend bumpers.
Yeah.
And like a rope to tie off, like a long rope to tie off to one of the pilings on. And maybe you can use like a towel or what have you, but you can definitely scrape up your gel coat or your rub rail if you're not prepared to like fish right next to the piling.
Yeah, we're talking like pull your boat up tight to the piling. It's when you want a little aluminum John boat. It's like a great thing to do on an aluminum John boat, or just a boat you're not scared about scratching up the sides. But I've seen some stuff people have made, like some PVC caps to go over their gunnels and stuff like that, where you can, this one dude I saw had cut a PVC pipe, like not in half, but like cut a good chunk out of it, and then put foam in there, and then could pop that onto his gunnel as he pulled up next to the dock, and it would keep it from scraping. But you can have some great days of sheepshead fishing around here, especially right now. You can go catch 10, 12, and a lot of times you'll catch a redfish or a black drum mixed in with them, fishing vertically like that. So it's crazy how if you're tied up well and you're not making too much noise, how close those fish will get to your boat and eat. They're used to swimming around structure, so your boat sitting there is just, as long as you're not loud on or anything, it's just like part of that structure. But what do you think might be too shallow to vertically target sheepshead?
I'd say, I don't know, because I thought it needed to be at least like, say, 5 or 6 feet to really like have a good chance of catching some.
Right.
But last year in the summer, just because of time restraints, I had to go at like a dead low tide, and the pilings that they had been hanging out on in the previous weeks were like pretty close up to the edge of the intercoastal, and it was probably like 3 feet deep. And for whatever reason, they didn't bite as well, but we were still catching them in that almost shallower water. But I would say in general, 5 to 6 plus feet.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like you said, you can catch them a little shallower for sure, but the deeper you got, the more comfortable they are. It seems like on the bridge pilings, especially around Wrightsville Beach, they like that like 5 to 8 feet of water, 4 to 8 feet of water for sure.
Yeah.
But it's funny, like it's funny to think about depth and like how far fish are away. So like when you think of 20 feet deep, you're like, God, that's super deep. Like we don't need to be all that quiet. We're fishing 20 feet of water. We're not going to spook these fish. But if you think about that, that's just typically like a little longer or a little shorter than like your average boat. So when you flip a boat on it from end to end, 20 feet, that's nothing. So like if you're loud on your boat, if you're walking around, rocking your boat, like that's very close to those fish. And someone shared that with me one time, and putting it in perspective, we're like sitting on my skiff, and I'm like, it's 1.5 foot longer than this. So like that's how deep you are. That's how far away you are from those fish. It becomes very real. It's the same thing as being 20 feet away from a fish when you're sight fishing. You can very easily spook a fish at 20 feet.
Yeah.
So distance-wise seems shorter in my head than depth, but that's not the case.
Yeah. Um, you want to talk about baits that we use?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think if there's anything else current or spot wise.
Oh, one thing I did forget to mention, and I forget to bring this sometimes, and I'm always kicking myself, but is a paint scraper.
Yeah.
Um, pulling up to piling, pretty much every one I pull up to, I'll scrape it, chisel some barnacles off and whatnot to try and get a little bit of scent out in the water.
Yeah.
And then that'll sometimes bring them in or turn the bite on. But people have also told me, and I've seen for myself, that if you do too much, they'll just eat all those barnacles that are getting chiseled off, and then they'll be full and they won't eat your crabs or whatever. And
That's crazy.
I talked about this a little bit last night, but I've cut one open before that where we did that, and it was one of the first times I ever did it. And I chiseled like a ton of barnacles off, and his stomach was completely full of all those shavings.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
He's just sitting back there in the current like, well, this is the easiest day of eating I've ever
Yeah,
had.
this is the easiest meal I've ever had.
That's awesome. Yeah, the paint scraper is clutch. And I will say, be careful when you're scraping those barnacles with a paint scraper. It honestly doesn't even hurt to have a glove on, because as you're sitting there going like this, I've done it before and like slipped and hit my knuckles across the tops of the barnacles and sliced them up pretty good.
Yeah, not fun.
But, well, yeah, I think bridge pilings, rock piles, it doesn't hurt to idle around those bridges too and find like isolated pieces of structure, because they're not just going to be on the pilings. You can also catch them on dock pilings. And one way to target sheepshead that's so effective is from a kayak or a canoe. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people have access to a kayak or canoe, and you can put it in at like the public access near a bridge, and you can spend a whole day just paddling around that bridge catching sheepshead. I guarantee you there's more sheepshead on that bridge than you can catch in a day. And so it's just a good way to get out there. You're not worried about beating a boat up too bad. So if you don't have a boat or you have a kayak and would rather use that, I mean, it'd be a really, really good way. You're sneakier, you're quieter. It's a good way to target those sheepshead in shallow water.
Yeah.
Well, share a little bit about some of the different jigs that we've kind of come to like to fish, and maybe start out talking about how both of you and I started fishing with Carolina rigs for sheepshead and how that's kind of changed.
Yeah, so I guess I was taught to fish sheepshead with a Carolina rig, and I just never have been a huge fan of Carolina rigs, at least for like what I do.
Yeah.
One, they take a little time to tie. They get tangled really easy. If something breaks, like if your weight gets caught or something, you're essentially having to like redo the whole rig. So they're effective, but not quite as effective, I think, as some of the other options that are out there.
Agreed.
But, yeah. So, what'd you say?
I said agreed.
Yeah. But so like, I think you have buddies that were using these, and they've just been game changers for me. But one of which is one of these bottom sweeper.
Yeah.
Jigs. Oh, yeah. And they come in different weights and different hook sizes and everything, but these have been great. And I think one thing that makes a big difference, and I hadn't really thought about it until you've brought it up, but because this attaches straight to your line, you can feel the bite like way easier. And with those Carolina rigs, it just wasn't as easy to feel the bite, so you'd end up missing a lot of fish, just due to that little piece of mono or fluorocarbon, whatever you're using, that's coming off the back of the Carolina rig. So that's been a game changer for me. And then there's another company. I think I'm not sure when they started, but they make some really cool similar jigs. It's called 432 Fishing, and they can put different color powder coats on their jigs, and they also make.
Where did you find those? I haven't seen those.
This guy actually reached out to me on social media, and was essentially just asked to send me some and try them out.
Those are sweet.
Yeah, they're really cool looking. Honestly, they look like some of the colors that he's provided really look like what the side of a piling with growth on it would look like.
Oh, really? That's sick.
Yeah, so I haven't tested them out yet, but it'll be interesting to see if color really makes a difference. I'm not really sure.
I've always thought, like, why is somebody not making one of those that's painted like a little mud crab or like a little fiddler crab, like the color of it, or like the shell, so it looks like two little fiddler crabs together, you know, and you just pop a crab on there.
I mean, I don't know if you can. Here, let me pull one of these out. You can kind of see the color a little better. But it's caught in the plastic. All right, here we go. Can you see the color on this?
Oh yeah, that looks killer.
It looks like, the growth on the side of a piling.
Yeah, super natural looking.
Like,
is that kind of what he's going for? Did he tell you that's what he's going for with those colors?
I'm not really sure. I hadn't asked him what inspired him to do these different colors, but I think they look really good.
Heck yeah.
And again, like these type of jigs are great for fishing structure for like redfish, black drum. I think fishing near shore reefs and what have you.
Definitely.
I feel like I've been saying what have you a lot lately. I probably need to take
what
it out.
have you?
What have you?
I will say I've never fished anything other than like crab on those jigs. There might be applications for it. There might be people that do. But to me, those are like crab jigs. Like a bottom sweeper, that one you were talking about. First Flight makes some jigs that work really well. The Carolina Treat, which is like a swing jig, and he has a shape that's like the one that the bottom sweeper in 4321. Is that what you were saying? 4321 jigs.
4321 fishing.
4321 fishing.
432 fishing.
432 fishing. Sweet. Mm-hmm. They're just they're built for that subtle bite or that like picky bite on a crab, and can be super effective. The one thing that I have found is, I wish I had one of them. Do you have a First Flight Carolina Treat jig with you?
Is that the football one?
That's the football one.
Yep, got it right here.
Okay, so for everyone listening,
with it.
It's First Flight Lures. It's called a Carolina Treat jig. So essentially, it's a football-shaped jig with an articulating hook right off the back of it. So it's like those jigs we were just showing you, except the football shape is long ways instead of like vertical on the hook. And I've found when I'm fishing like on a bridge piling and whatnot, bottom sweepers all day, or like those fixed hook jigs. But when I'm fishing the bottom and I'm letting that jig touch the bottom, like maybe out in the ocean or fishing a rock pile or oyster bar in deeper water, or a wreck or something like that, that Carolina Treat jig works so well because you can always get it out. You can drop it down in there. I mean, I lose some, but you can get it out of almost everything. Like that shape, that football shape, was designed, or was kind of founded in the bass fishing world, with football head jigs for fishing over rock. And that was because you could really always pop it and wiggle it and get it through little cracks and rocks and stuff like that. So that's kind of, I think, where Gene's the dude who makes those Carolina Treat jigs, First Flight Lures. That is where he, I think, got the idea for that shape. At least I'm giving him the credit for that. I could be wrong. But it's a super effective way to fish them. Those Sheepshead, sometimes they're sitting right there on the bottom, along with redfish and black drum, if it's like some structure on the bottom, so you're kind of sitting there bouncing it on the bottom, and every once in a while you'll get hung up, and being able to wiggle it out is pretty clutch.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say too, just to give that 432 fishing guy another shout out, he does make something similar to this as well, and he'll powder coat this weight.
Oh, well, sweet.
Dude, yeah.
Heck yeah. I need to check those out. I'm acquiring quite the collection of crab jigs.
Crab jigs.
Yeah. I just coined the term and I forgot it already. Speaking of jigs, this has nothing to do with the Sheepshead, but again, for those of y'all listening, you won't be able to see them. I have been working on something with this guy NC Sinkers in Raleigh. He does a bunch of lead pouring and jig painting for fun. And we've been trying to get a little tiny casting jig dialed in for picky albacore. And he just sent me the first prototypes of the jig the other day. And so NC Sinkers on Instagram, you can go check him out. He does he's got tons and tons of molds. He even designs his own molds on AutoCAD, gets them 3D printed, and then makes the mold and then pours molds. So that's what he did for these. But essentially, it's like just over an inch. It's a little casting jig. It's not gonna show up well color wise. There
it is.
And I think the albacore will eat it really well when they're being real picky. And he named it for me, the Jud jig, and he put it in the mold, which I thought was pretty sweet. But yeah, he's got a bunch of colors. If y'all are interested in these for bonita and albacore when they're eating that really small bait, leave a comment. Hit me up on Instagram or leave a comment on YouTube or something like that, because I'm going to try to start producing these and selling them a little bit, just to get them out there, because it is so frustrating when you're albacore fishing and you don't have a jig small enough to get them to eat. And this is still bigger than the bait they eat, way bigger than the bait they eat, but I think it's small enough that if you rip it really fast, they're going to eat it, because that's typically kind of the play. But I think I'm even going to work with him on making something a little bit smaller, like this, just under an inch. But you're going to have to throw it on such a light rod. But if they'll eat it, it's definitely worth it. It's worth fighting a little bit harder.
Definitely.
But yeah, if you want me to start making these and you being able to pick them up, I think these would also work great jigging in shallower water, casting for Spanish. Just a small profile jig can be really effective. So just hit us up on Instagram or on here or on YouTube, or I don't know what here is, but just hit us up somewhere and let us know if you want some Jud jigs.
Jud has about 15 websites, so it should be pretty easy to find.
Maybe so. Maybe not though. Maybe that makes it more difficult. But let's talk a little bit about. We've talked about location. We've talked about baits. Have we talked about tide? Like when is your favorite time in the tide to fish them?
No, we haven't.
What would you say? Inshore, I don't sheepshead fish inshore much.
Mm-hmm.
I go a couple times a year, I feel like, but I like to fish them in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite tide inshore to fish? Because I feel like I would not be a good representation of knowing that well enough.
I don't think, for me, I feel like the bite will shut off slightly at like slack tides, but anytime there's just some tide movement, I think it's pretty good.
Gotcha.
If the tide's really ripping, like if it's coming from a negative low to a flood tide, it might affect a little bit just because there's so much current.
Yeah.
So I'd say on your normal tide swings, anytime that the water is moving is generally like the better times.
Okay.
But again, I'm an expert on, like, I haven't written down what the tide's been doing when I've caught them really well, but I do seem to remember the tide was always moving.
Yeah, moving pretty good. There's not like a specific, like, the first 2 hours of the falling tide. And
not that I've noticed, but again, like I could be wrong on that, but not that I've noticed.
Yeah, for sure. I would say the same thing. I mean, based off of my minimal experience of doing it inshore. But it's, I think it depends on the area too. If it's an area that the current rips super hard, they'll probably bite a little bit better when that current slows down. If it's an area where the current's just kind of a steady flow the whole time through the tide cycle, they'll probably eat the whole time. So just like any fish, they don't want to expend too much energy in that current to feed. So if it's a good current break, though, they probably will. If there's a good eddy or whatnot. Well, let's talk a little bit about, let's move into talking about like bait and what we like to fish, or what type of bait we like to use. And we'll go in. Sorry, I'm just firing questions at you, but
you're good.
Backing you up. Share with us kind of the couple different types of bait that you like to use for sheepshead fishing.
Sure. I'll start with my failures first, and then I'll
Sweet.
go into
like
my successes. I think for the longest time, everything I read online was like, oh, you want to catch sheepshead? Like, cut shrimp. I was like, okay. And, man, I don't think I ever caught a sheepshead on cut shrimp. And it might be because it's just, old bait and it's dead and it's been frozen and it's not fresh. But really, I think it's just because everything eats it.
Yeah.
Like the pinfish, the mullet, the croakers, the black sea bass, everything eats the cut shrimp. And it just gets picked apart before you can even get a real bite. And I think you had a good point. I can't remember if it was last night or a different time, but he said to be successful with essentially like structure fishing or reef fishing is like to have that bait down there and presented for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And not get destroyed by other little fish. And so then I moved to fiddler crabs, which are generally pretty easy to find as long as the tide's low.
Yeah.
And so those are really good baits for me for a while. And I think you can have a lot of success on fiddler crabs, and they're, like I said, fairly easy to find. But they also do get picked apart a little bit. Not near as bad as a cut shrimp, but you will need a lot of fiddler crabs if you plan on going sheepshead fishing for more than a couple hours. Like, I don't know, how many do you think you would need for?
Yeah, solo. Like I feel like fishing a fiddler crab, one doesn't last more than like 15 seconds down there, ever.
Yeah.
So you're changing baits like maybe 30 seconds. Let's say 30 seconds. You're changing bait every 30 seconds. So let's say 2 a minute. Is that true, or do you think it's that quick?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes they last longer than others. But
let's average one a minute.
Thing is,
1 a minute. So if you want to fish for an hour, it's nice to have 60 crabs.
Yeah, I think the big thing is too, is a lot of times it might not be trash fish picking the bait off or picking it apart. A lot of times it's sheepshead.
Yeah,
because they're notoriously hard to hook, and you'll feel them. It might feel like a little trash fish picking at it, but it could be a sheepshead. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. You're like, man, am I just like on a piling that's full of trash fish, or is there just sheepshead all over the place down there picking my crabs apart every time I put it down there?
That's so true.
But I think fiddler crabs are really good to use. And then if you had the time and you want to put on some gloves and your extra tufts and go walk around on a oyster bar at low tide, I think mud crabs are probably the best option.
The cream.
Yeah.
The creme de la creme.
The creme de la creme.
Yeah, mud crabs, man, they have really changed the game, at least in my opinion, for that flood tide or that sheepshead fishing, just because the simple fact of how thick their shell is and how well they last down there. And the more and more I clean fish, like the crab eating fish, like sheepshead, redfish, black drum, like every one of them always has mud crabs in its stomach. There's a lot of baits I've caught redfish on that I don't really ever see in their stomach. Like I rarely see mullet and menhaden and like slot redfish's stomachs. It's always like blue crab, mud crab, and shrimp if it's fresh. But a lot of times shrimp just disintegrates so much quicker and easier. And don't get me wrong, I'll see bait fish, but more times than not, it's like croaker or spot or something like that in a redfish's stomach than mullet and menhaden. But they're definitely using mud crabs as a large part of their diet. I think they're the sheepshead, the black drum, the redfish, and maybe more so the black drum and the redfish than the sheepshead. But the sheepshead definitely like to eat them. So it's a great bait. That thick shell just holds up so well. It's like a stone crab shell pretty much, and so you will a lot of times like you'll hook the sea bass that are screwing with it, but the crab's still in there and it's fine. But like the sea bass just gets hooked, it's a little small dinky sea bass, and you just pop him off and then drop the crab back down there because it's completely fine. But the other bait that I agree with you on all those baits. The other bait that can be good to use is like freshly quartered blue crab. You can definitely catch sheepshead on freshly quartered blue crab. I would say the order of what I would like to fish would be a mud crab first if I could fish it, a fiddler crab next if I can't fish mud crab, then after that quartered blue crab. But they'll definitely still eat that quartered blue crab. Seaview Crab Company here in town is a great place to go get live crabs by the dozen. You can go in there and ask for a dozen mixed crabs, and that'll be your cheapest option of like jimmies and females and different sizes. So that's a good way to, and a jimmy, I think that's a male crab is what I've always thought. So could be wrong. If I'm wrong, let me know. But I was in there the other day and they were like, we don't have mixed crabs, all we have is jimmies left. And so I was like, I'll take the jimmies. It was like $30 more for just the males because they were so much bigger. It's usually like I think like $20 or $30 for a dozen. That's $20 a dozen, and then I think it was like ended up being like $38 for the all jimmies, but they were all much larger. So it is what it is.
I'll say too, just a last piece of advice is like, fiddler crabs and mud crabs can stay alive for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so if you're like planning on going sheepshead fishing in the morning, but the tide's going to be high in the morning, you can always go get them like that afternoon or the day before.
Yeah.
On a low tide and get them and just put them in a bucket, and they should be fine.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for keeping them alive is just keeping them cool. Like, don't sit them out in the sun in a bucket, let them bake, they'll die pretty quick. And just keeping some moisture in there. So not like drowning them in water, but just like if you take some newspaper and wet it with salt water and like lay it down on the bottom, or like a couple paper towels, or they just got some moisture down in there with them, that definitely helps keep them alive well. But yeah, you can keep those things alive. I will tell you, once they die, they stink to high heavens. So you'll know pretty quickly. It's funny how quickly crab goes bad. Like as soon as it dies, especially blue crab, like the meat kind of shrivels up in it and it stinks.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
So, is there anything else we're missing? I know this is a shorter podcast, but like we said, we're trying to sneak her in here, and we're gonna try to knock out a short Patreon recording after this as well. So you guys, if y'all have not gone over and checked us out on Patreon, we put a lot of extra content up there. Try to answer everyone's questions as quickly as we can over there, and if you just want to support the podcast, you like what we're doing, it is a huge help. It helps us pay for all the back end stuff, and we're just super appreciative of that. So go check out our Patreon. It's just Eastern Current on Patreon. It'll be linked in the show notes on the podcast platforms as well as the YouTube description. But is there anything else we missed for this show here?
I don't think so. I think it's, sheepshead fishing is pretty straightforward. I definitely recommend people go try it if they haven't before.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to do with like family or kids, or just something to do on a day when it's poopy out.
Yeah, like a rainy day, you can go sit under a bridge and sheepshead fish.
Yep.
On a Saturday if you still want to really get out and fish. So get out there.
And they're great to eat. Man,
they're delicious to eat. They suck on a fillet knife though. They're hard to clean.
Yeah, they are.
Those scales are worse than redfish.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for recording with me, Cameron. Guys, as always, thank you all so much for your support. Sorry this is just a little mini episode, but we're just, we wanted to talk sheepshead, and personally, I don't think there's much more we can dive into on the sheepshead front, in one swing. Seasonally, we're kind of talking about this season, of the summer season for sheepshead. So hopefully this was helpful. Hope you all get out there if you haven't done it and go target some sheepshead. If you have targeted sheepshead a bunch, and when we missed anything, definitely leave it in the comments. Let us know. We'll include it in the next podcast. Love to share that with other people. But guys, we will see you on the next episode. Peace.